Hello everyone and welcome to the BioBus Student Town Hall Live. My name is Christine and I'm a scientist at BioBus. Before we actually get started with the town hall, I first wanted to identify this mystery microscope with you. Did you figure out what it is? And maybe you want to look again back in the background. This picture is a close-up of human cheek cells. You can see the circle in the middle of each cell outlined. And that's actually the nucleus where the boss of each cell, the genetic material or DNA, lives. These cells kind of remind us that the human body consists of many, many individual cells. Our skin is an important barrier defending our body from dangerous germs. We'll learn about it in this hour from our scientists. And as you know, at BioBus, we love to use microscopes. Let me give you a little bit more information about BioBus. So BioBus is an education nonprofit building a scientific community for everyone by bringing scientists and students together to discover, explore, and pursue science. We are based in New York City, where we operate 2 mobile labs. These are the 2 BioBuses filled with microscopes, which you might have seen or even been on. Plus, we actually have a very cool state-of-the-art community laboratory, the BioBase in Harlem, by the #1 train. Come to do some science with us when the space is open again, and we hope this is going to be open again soon. Stay till the end to learn about our different programs. Now, this is about not only me, but we have many cool scientists joining today. We are so excited that the topic today is actually the flu around you. We have 3 guests, and I'm just going to introduce them, and they are here to answer all your questions. We have Dr. Maria Sundaram, who is an infectious disease epidemiologist, meaning that she studies how germs that make people sick spread through communities. She is a postdoctoral fellow at ICIS in Ontario, Canada. We also have Dr. Julie Schafer, who is the Chief Technology Officer of the Flu Lab, and she works to find new ways to defeat the flu. And then we have Dr. Florian Krammer, who is a virologist. This means he's a scientist who studies viruses. He's a professor of vaccinology at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. So Maria, Julie, and Florian, welcome to the BioBus Town Hall. Let's start with some introductions. Maria, could you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, my name is Maria Sundaram, and I'm an epidemiologist. So that means most of my science looks at how diseases spread through groups of people. And also, you need big groups of people to do that science. So here I've got a couple of pictures of my groups of people. One of them is at Yale University, and another one is at Marshfield Clinic, which is a clinic in Wisconsin. And then there's a picture of me doing a headstand by Spoon and Cherry. That's in Minneapolis.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Maria. Julie, could you introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Oh, I'm so happy to.
Oh, sorry.
We skipped over Maria's big questions.
Oh, yeah, Maria's big questions. You want to present your questions? I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah. So as the slide says, I'm interested in what happens when people and flu meet and all of the unpredictable ways that can go. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, I think, during the town hall. But one of the things that makes flu so exciting is that it's so hard for us to understand what it's going to do next, who it's going to infect, what kind it's going to be, when that's going to happen, when it's going to be at the peak for our communities, when it's going to taper off. And we're also going to talk, I think, a little very tiny amount about COVID-19. So I'm also investigating some risk factors for that.
Wow, that's even more amazing. Thank you so much. Now, Julie, the floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Hi, I'm Julie Schafer, and I find flu so interesting that I've spent my entire career working on it. There's a little picture up you can see of I spent many years working on bringing vaccine technologies all around the world, from Vietnam and Serbia and even North Carolina. And I also spent a lot of time doing pandemic planning. And so there I am standing, that's a building right on the White House compound where I worked with people all across government on what kind of plans we should have in place for if a pandemic happened. And now, of course, we're in one. And that picture is also special because I'm standing right next to my current coworker at Flu Lab, Casey. That shows you how long we've known each other and how many years we've worked together. And then in the little corner, there's a picture of me doing what I like to do when we're not in a pandemic, which is exploring underwater and traveling the world to see all kinds of new worlds. And my next questions, let's see. Oh, here we go. And you know what? I have an amazing job in which I just get to dream. And the things that I like to dream about related to flu are tools that we could wear on our body or have near us that could tell us that we're sick before we know we're sick. Tests that we could take at home that would be really easy to let us know what we're sick with. And then things like, what kind of things could we have that would do everything that a mask does, but without actually having to wear something on our face that covers up half our face? Those are just, I could go on, but those are the kind of things I like to dream about regarding flu.
Thank you. This is really great, and I want to so much learn about it. Now let's go to our last guest, and it's actually Florian. Could you introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Yeah, my name is Florian Krammer, and I'm a virologist at Mount Sinai. You're probably familiar with the Mount Sinai Hospital next to Central Park. And I was always interested in studying viruses, even when I was still a teenager. And that's what I really do. Mostly influenza viruses, but also coronaviruses and some other viruses that are less common. And so what we do in the laboratory is studying how the immune system, how our body reacts to a virus infection. And then we are taking what we learn from that and we are trying to make new vaccines and new therapeutics, new medication that can be used to treat people when they get sick. And what you see here is a picture of me and my laboratory during a lab retreat. So we do that once a year where we just go to some nice place on the beach maybe. We talk about science for 2 days and we interact with each other, and the people in the lab get to know each other. And then you see one picture of me in the office. I'm actually wearing the same t-shirt today. And one of the things that I really like to do is hiking and mountain climbing, and that's what you see in this picture on the upper right. Yeah, and there's, in a way, I don't have big scientific questions. I'm really very curious about viruses. And as I said, I study many different viruses in many different ways. And I use what we learn from these viruses to create new vaccines.
Great, thank you so much, all three of you. And we actually have, I'm gonna stop sharing here to get people's faces here. We actually have more people in the room. There's another BioBus scientist joining us, and her name is Tessa, and she's actually gonna be in the chat, and she will be collecting your questions. So ask away anything that you want to know in the chat. Tessa, can you introduce yourself and maybe also tell us what you would like to learn about the flu today?
Hi, my name is Tessa. It's great to see everybody. I'm interested in learning the differences between the flu and COVID-19.
Oh, great question. I think we're going to talk about this. All right, so this is how it will work. You all submitted amazing questions and ahead of time, and that's what I'm going to be asking the scientists. But remember, we also can be taking questions from the chat. So if you are curious about something specific that you want to ask, put it in the chat now so we can ask your questions to the scientists later on. Tell us your name, age, and also school. Now for the scientists, you have about 2 minutes to answer each question. If you're running out of time, my co-host Ruby the Rabies is gonna come out and will signal that time is up for you. Okay, let's go. My first question is actually for Florian, and it is, what is the flu and how does it look like? And the question is coming from me because I have never seen a virus with my naked eye.
All right, so I certainly can address that question. And this is what I'm showing here. So flu, like many other viruses, are it's just a tiny little particle. You can't see it with your naked eye. You can't even see it through a microscope. You need a very special microscope that's called an electron microscope to see it. And I will show you a picture in a minute. But what flu and many other viruses are basically is some protein, usually on the outside of the particle, then the particle itself, which is made out of fat, and then usually have some information on the inside. that's basically the genome of the virus. And if these components come together, you have a virus that can infect the cell. And so for influenza viruses, there's two special proteins on the surface. One is called hemagglutinin, or HA, and the other one is called neuraminidase, or NA. And that's how we name these viruses. For example, H1N1, which is a common name for influenza viruses, means that you have a hemagglutinin of the type 1 on the surface and the neuraminidase of the type 1. So basically, it's just protein, fat, sugar, and some information. Sounds almost like a good breakfast. And if you look at these viruses through an electron microscope, again, this is very specialized, it's not like a regular microscope, then it looks like this. So you basically see these particles, you see the fat, this is this ring around it, this fuzzy stuff on the outside, these are the proteins with a little bit on sugar on it. And then on the inside, you have the information. And the information comes split up in 8 little pieces that we call genomic segments. And so each of these pieces is very special. And a virus needs to get the 8 different pieces and needs to include it. And this is actually very tricky, complex, very tricky way of forming a virus. But again, this is how they look like. They're very, very tiny, and you cannot see them through a regular microscope, but with an electron microscope, you can.
Thank you, Florian. Actually, I have a follow-up question to this. So this question is from Alejandro 10. He's from PS 155. And he asks, how does the flu get into your body?
Well, yes, that's actually a relatively easy question. So the flu comes from usually another person. It doesn't just exist in nature. So another person is sick, and then that person breathes and maybe coughs or sneezes. And in that process, there are little droplets coming out of that person's mouth or out of that person's nose. And that's where the virus sits, in these droplets. They might be very tiny. You might not even see them. But when you then inhale these droplets with the virus, these droplets attach to the surface of your lung, of the inside of your nose, and so on and so forth. And then the virus starts to attach to your cells. It's actually using this protein on the surface to attach to sugars which are found on your cells. And that's how it can get in, and that's how you get infected. So it's always coming from another person.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Now, I actually gonna have a question that was sent in by 3 different young scientists. And their names are Anya, Charlize, and Emily. They're from PS 1112, PS 178M, and PS 130. And it's a question for Maria. Maria, how does the flu make the body sick?
So Florian already talked a little bit about how the flu gets in your nose. And it really likes, especially earlier on, it likes to hang out in that part of your nose. You know, when you go swimming and you accidentally get a little water up your nose and it stings really bad, it's kind of that area, kind of really far back there. But then your immune system notices that there's something there that shouldn't be there. And it says, uh-oh, I'm going to take care of this problem. And so then it starts to get all of those tissues inflamed at the inside of your nose, and also maybe kind of down into your lungs a little bit as well. And then after that inflammation part, it develops these memory immune cells. We call them T cells and B cells. And those cells develop a memory for the flu virus, and then they remember it the next time that they see that particular virus. So when you're feeling really sick and tired and really just kind of, you know, like sad and just not feeling very good, just junky, it's because your body is using your immune system to fight off that viral infection. So you might feel tired, you might feel like you have a headache, you might feel body aches all over, you might get a fever, and then you also might get a cough.
Okay, thank you, Maria. It was a very good explanation. Thank you. Now so much more. Now, I have another question, Florian. And the question is from Kevin. He's 14 from Vacaville High School. And he's asked, how many strains of the flu are there?
Well, there's many different strains of flu. There's types of influenza or flu that circulate in humans that make humans sick. And so basically we have three types there. One is called, as I explained earlier, H1N1. Another one is called H3N2 because these proteins on the surface are a little bit different. And then we have another one that's called flu B. So that's a little bit different than the other two, but it's still flu. And they can unfortunately still make you pretty sick. So that's in humans, but influenza or flu can also be found in a lot of birds and, for example, in marine mammals like whales or seals. And if you look at all the different kinds of flu that can be around, there is at least 18 different subtypes. We call them subtypes. And within each of these subtypes, there's many different strains. So there's probably thousands and thousands, maybe millions of different flu strains out there. Most of them are harmless for humans. Some of them can make you pretty sick. But in humans, it's mostly three different kinds. That's what you should remember.
Thank you, Florian. Okay, I have another question. This one was sent in from Cliselle. She's 18 years old and she's from Conewaena High School. What I want to learn is the old history of the flu. Where does the flu come from? And maybe that's a good question for Maria.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And it's maybe two different questions. One of them is kind of like, what's our history with flu as people? And then maybe the other part of that question is, where did the flu virus develop from? And how has it been existing as a virus? Like, did it exist during the dinosaur times? So I'll talk about the people, because that's the part that I really know about. So flu as a virus, we know has been causing global pandemics for a long time. But the biggest one that we kind of think about is a pandemic that happened about 102 years ago in 1918. This pandemic was a really severe influenza that unfortunately killed a lot of people. And actually, since then, we had three more sort of major global pandemics in 1957, 1968, and then in 2009 also. So we honestly have quite a long history as humanity. We have quite a long history with flu viruses. They were only sort of discovered recently by us, but they've been around for a while, and it's likely that they caused pandemics before 1918 too.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, if you're just joining BioBus Student Town Hall, my name is Christine, and I'm here with three other scientists, Maria, Julie, and Florian, and we're taking your questions about the flu around you. Let's take some questions from the chat. Tessa, do you have any chat questions for us?
Oh, I definitely do. So Ines asks, what composes the virus and how are they made in the first place?
That's a great question. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I can go for it. So I just showed what composes the virus, right? There's information on the inside, which again is called the genome. And then typically for influenza viruses, there is a membrane around that's made out of fat. And on top of that membrane, you have proteins. So that's what the different ingredients for the virus are. There's also a little bit sugar on top of these proteins. Little tiny sugar residues that are attached to the proteins. Now, how is the virus made? The virus can only be made by cells, by living cells. And so depending on if it's an influenza virus that infects animals or an influenza virus that infects us, the virus goes into the cell and then reprograms your cell with the genome, the genomic information that it has, and tells the cell, hey, go ahead and make more of me, make copies of me. And so one virus goes into a cell and then forces your cells to make more of it. And usually there's tens, thousands of new viruses that come out of that cell. So basically the virus is using your cells to reproduce itself. So it's very parasitic relationship. But that's how these viruses are made.
Wow, thank you, Florian. Like a virus hijacking my cells to make more of itself. That's amazing. Do you have another question, Tessa?
Yes, we do. This one's from Tenzin, and he says, if you can find the parts of the flu, can you reverse the flu cells or find the cells that are kind of the opposite to give to the patient? And I think Julie, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I mean, it's such a great question, because I think that the people maybe who invented vaccines were maybe thinking a little bit like that. So you definitely have the thinking of a scientist. And so, when we get vaccines, what we usually are doing, and of course, science is always changing and we're always looking for different and better ways to do things. But how we traditionally make vaccines, what we're trying to do is to show the body a part of a virus so that the body can recognize it and build up defenses. And that way, when your body encounters it in real life, you already have your defenses ready. So it's using that little bit of it of a virus to help give your immune system a head start to be able to protect you from an infection. So that's one way that we can use the kind of the part of a virus to kind of turn it against itself.
Thank you, Julie. All right, so we're going to move back to questions already have been submitted previously. And I have a very cool one from Nina. She's 6 years old. She's not going to school yet. She's still going to kindergarten. And she's asking, can cats get the flu? Maybe Florian and Maria want to talk about this?
I would just say yes, cats can get the flu, and they're not the only ones. Cats, dogs, Florian mentioned whales, seals, frogs, in addition, of course, to people, wild birds, poultry, pigs, a whole bunch of different animals can get the flu.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that. There was actually a pretty bad flu outbreak in an animal shelter in New York City 4 years ago, where a lot of cats got infected with the virus, with actually a bird flu virus. The good thing is most of the cats recovered. They just started coughing and didn't feel well, but after some time they got better. There was just one very old cat called Mimi that unfortunately died, but all the other cats made it.
I'm so glad all the other cats made it, and rest in peace, Mimi. So I have a question from Kelly, 13, Tompkins Square Middle School. And the question is, what is the difference between a coronavirus and the flu? Maybe Florian, you want to take this?
Yeah, I can take this. So there's interesting questions. I told you that flu has these 8 different pieces on the inside that contain its information. We call them genomic segments. So it has 8 of them. Coronavirus only has one of those segments. So that's a major difference. The interesting part is coronavirus, if you would read the information, you could just read it. For flu, that information is written backwards, which is very awkward, but that's the case. And then we were talking about these proteins on the surface of the virions and of the particles, and flu has 2 different ones, and coronavirus only has 1. So you basically can think about flu like it's a cow with 2 different horns, and basically coronavirus is a unicorn. It just has 1 of these horns. And then there's also a difference in speed, right? Flu is very fast. If you get infected with flu today, you might already be terribly sick tomorrow. But with coronavirus, it's different. Coronavirus is a little bit lazy. So you might get infected today, but you might just start to feel sick in a week or maybe even 2 weeks. So what we call the incubation time is very different between the 2 viruses, but both are pretty dangerous. Right now, we are more worried about COVID, about SARS coronavirus 2, but also flu can be devastating.
I see. Thank you, Florian. Now I have another question from Heaven, Manhattanville Community Center, who's asking, can the flu infect objects? And And that might be another question for Florian or whoever wants to chime in.
Well, I'll jump in and then let Florian correct me because I'm very comfortable with that. So we don't really think so much of the flu infecting objects, but it is possible for objects to infect us, kind of. That we can. So, what can happen is that, let's say I have flu and I'm touching my face and smearing things all over my face, and then I'm smearing it all over a doorknob, and then Florian touches the doorknob and then touches his face. It's possible that that object could help infect Florian. So it can kind of be an in-between step. I don't know, that's my take. What do you think, Florian?
Yeah, that's correct. And that is the case for many different viruses. But if the virus sits on an object, it doesn't do anything to the object. If it sits there for long enough, it will eventually die and cannot infect anybody anymore. But doesn't do anything to non-living things.
Great. And actually, I just see that, Tenzin asked the same question. So good for you guys. You all have the same amazing questions. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. Now, the next question is coming from Shatoni. She's 16 and she goes to Central Park East High School. She's asking, is it possible to get the flu twice from the same flu season? Julie, you want to take this on?
Well, I would. It sure is. So Florian talked a little bit about that there are lots of different flu strains. And so when we think about a flu season, which, for us can start in the fall and go through spring, there's more than one strain of flu that it is usually around us during that time. So when we get flu shots, the flu shots are protecting. What way we take them? We take them to protect us against more than one strain of flu. Nowadays, flu shots usually have 4. And so it's possible if you were to be infected with one, if you didn't get a flu shot, you didn't wash your hands, you didn't anything, or you're just very unlucky, you could become infected with one strain of flu and then recover, and then later on be infected with a different strain of flu, even though it's the same season. So it's certainly possible.
Wow, thank you, Julie. Now, I have another question. Are there any alternatives to the flu vaccine? Because you've been speaking about flu vaccines a lot. So this question is coming from Jenna Wu, 16, Central Park East High School, New York City.
So I'm going to answer that 2 different ways. I'm going to go talk really fast so that I don't get the rabies thing shaking at me. So first, I think that the first thing is that right now, a flu shot is the best way that we have to protect ourselves against the flu. And we are also seeing that a lot of the measures that we are taking now to protect ourselves against COVID-19 can also protect us against the flu. So things like keeping distance between people that aren't in the same household, or in things like wearing masks and things that keep us from being in close contact with each other if we're not in the same household, are also things that make it harder for flu to spread. So our flu season, as I just said, is from fall until spring. And then on the other part of the world, the Southern Hemisphere, their winter is our summer. So they just had their flu season. And we saw there that they didn't really have much of a flu season because of all of the things that they were doing to protect themselves against the COVID-19 pandemic. The second way I want to answer your question really quickly is that while the flu shot is the best thing that we can do now to protect ourselves against flu, we do want it to be better. And so we are always working, we spend a lot of our research time and with wonderful researchers trying to find ways to make better flu shots. So maybe flu shots that we'll only take one, and then we won't need to take another one for another 10 years or maybe ever again, or and shots that work better. So those are alternatives that we're always working for the future.
Great, thank you, Julie. If you're just joining us to our BioBus Student Town Hall, my name is Christine and I'm here with scientists Maria, Julie and Florian, and we are taking your questions about the flu around you. Let's take some questions from the chat. Tessa?
Yes, so we have a question that came up twice in the chat already. Can plants get the flu? And if not, why?
That is a great question. And I can honestly say, I don't think I've ever heard this question before. So that means it's a very good question. You know that you're doing good science if you're asking a question no one has ever asked before. No, plants can't get the flu. And that is partly because of something Florian said earlier about how flu enters cells. Flu needs the right things to grab onto so that it can enter a cell. And plant cells are different than human cells and other animal cells in that way.
Amazing. Do we have another question, Tessa?
Yes, we do. This one is from Danny, and he wants to know, so if us feeling bad is a result of our body fighting the virus, what can the virus do to our bodies if our body can't fight it?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, there's a lot that the virus can do to our bodies if we can't fight it. And that's partly why we really want people to get vaccinated that don't have the best immune systems. We really want them to be extra protected because if they get a virus, their immune system won't fight off the virus as well as for you or me. So unfortunately, that means that they could have more severe disease. It could be a more unpleasant illness for them. They might be sicker longer. And they might have really unusual outcomes that you and I probably wouldn't have. For example, the virus could get all the way to their brain or even to other parts of their body that normally it doesn't go. Normally it just stays kind of in our upper respiratory tract, which is just our nose and our throat, and then our lower respiratory tract, which is our lungs. So it can be really, really bad for people if their immune systems aren't working at full capacity. So we really need to make sure that we do all of our parts to protect them.
Thank you. All right, so let's go back to questions that were previously sent in, and we're going to have another round of chat questions, so don't worry about it. So Nicodem, 9 years old, actually wants to know what happens to the virus as if it gets transmitted from one person to another. Does it change? Does it grow stronger or weaker or stay the same? And I think that might be a good question for Florian. Florian, would you like to answer this one?
Yes, I'm happy to answer this one. So viruses, when they propagate themselves, we call it replication, when they make more of themselves, and when they copy the information that is contained in them, they make errors. That's what we call mutations. And so when viruses grow in one person and then are transmitted to another person, sometimes there is an error. And so they change. And that's very important for flu, because flu constantly does that. It changes around. And that's why we need to update the vaccines every year. And that's why you need to get vaccinated every year. Now, that doesn't make the virus weaker. The virus is still pretty bad. It doesn't help the virus to, it doesn't really make it a milder infection, right? So you should not expect that from flu when it infects people over time that it would get milder. You should also not expect that from COVID, for example. What we do see is that sometimes over a very long time, but we're not talking about a few years, we're talking about maybe 10,000s or 100,000s of years, a virus might become weaker and might coexist better with your body. And the reason for that is a virus doesn't necessarily want to kill you. If it does kill you, it cannot propagate and you're not walking around and infecting other people. And so there are certain viruses that live with humans for a long time, for example, herpes viruses, that usually don't make you very sick, but they stick around and they control your immune system, and your body can't really get rid of them, but you're also not getting really sick. And it can get even worse than that in a way. We have retroviruses, which are viruses that can integrate into your genome. And our genome is full of these viruses. So we carry them around, and many of them are actually not active anymore. They don't make you sick. Some of them can't even form little virus particles anymore. They just integrated into your genome. So there's two answers. Short term, years, hundreds of years, it's very unlikely that the virus gets weaker. But if you look at very, very long time frames, it might try to find a way to coexist with our bodies.
Thank you so much, Florian. Now, I have another question. Jesslyn, 13 years old, from PS 127 Queens, is asking, how can we stop this disease from spreading to one another, even though we should stay home? Are there any other things we can do now? Julie, what do you think?
Well, that's one of my favorite questions. I mean, they're all good, but that's an especially good one. Because it is about protecting, it's about protecting ourselves and also protecting the people in our community. So we can talk about the things that we can do about flu are to make sure that we can get our flu shots, and we can, and that's specific to flu. And then there are things that are important anytime that there are outbreaks of disease. Like right now, we are in this pandemic, so we know it's really important to keep distance between people, as we've talked about. We know it's really important to wear masks, especially when we're inside with people who are not in our family or our bubble of people that we share spaces with. And then there are things that are important all the time, because so it's always really important to keep our hands clean and to stay home when we're sick. So when we think about ways that we can protect ourselves and then to protect all the people around us, always staying home when we're sick and keeping our hands clean and taking good care of ourselves are amazing things that we can do to protect everyone.
Thank you, Julie. This is some really important things to keep in mind. Yeah, thank you. All right, because you spoke about, vaccines and getting a shot, Maya, and she's 5, from Our Lady of the Elms, is actually asking, does it hurt when you get shots?
Okay, Maya, I'm going to be honest with you. If you get a shot that has a needle, it's going to hurt a little bit, but it won't hurt for a super long time. It'll be like if your brother pinches you and it hurts, but then it's over with. It'll be like that. And if you get the spray, the flu mist spray vaccine, then it won't hurt at all.
Wow. How do you get the spray? How does this work?
So the spray is in a little tube. And when you go to the doctor's office, or if you go to your pharmacy, or even sometimes at the grocery store, they have it. They'll just stick the tube up your nose, and then they'll push on the bottom of the tube, and all of that juice in the tube goes up in your nose, and then you're vaccinated. That's it.
Wow. Maybe Maya, you want to speak to your parents if you can get that version. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Now, there's another question from Kevin, 14, from Beckerville High School. And he's asking, how many people should be vaccinated in the United States that aren't? Great question. And then there's another one. He says, how heavily will the mortality rates increase as more and more people choose not to vaccinate? So he's asking, I think, about vaccination rates and mortality rates. And I think Maria and maybe somebody else wants to take a stab on this.
This is such a good question, and it's the kind of question that I ask myself every year. Are enough people getting vaccinated against the flu? And if they're not getting vaccinated, what's going to happen? Are they going to get sicker? Are they going to need to be in the hospital? How can we plan for that? How can we make sure that everyone's as safe as possible? So right now, kids are doing a way better job overall than adults in the US. Kids are probably about 2/3 of kids are vaccinated every year against flu. and probably like a little bit under half of adults are vaccinated every year against flu. So you can tell your parents, hey, you know what? I won this year. As long as you got your flu shot. If you got your flu shot, you can tell them you won. But I think you brought up another really important point about mortality. So the people who are at biggest risk for really severe illness and also death from the flu are really young kids under the age of 5, and older adults, people maybe 70 years old and up. And so those are the two groups that we really especially want to be vaccinated as soon as possible and as completely as possible. And those two groups, it looks like they're doing a little bit of a better job, but of course we can always do better. And like Julie mentioned, we can always, have a better vaccine too. So we're working on both those things.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, there's another question. I think that's going to fit to all 3 of you. Luca, 8 years old from Western Secondary School, is actually asking, what are your roles in the COVID epidemic? Are you guys working on the front lines? And who wants to go first? Maybe Maria want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm pretty new in my career. So the kinds of work that I'm doing for COVID-19 are work like I talk a lot on the radio to other people and I answer questions just like I'm doing right now. But I also am doing some work to find out, hey, what are some factors about you that could make your risk of getting COVID-19 higher? For example, if you're older, do you have a bigger risk of getting COVID-19? If you're a girl versus if you're a boy, do you have a different risk of getting COVID-19? So I'm also looking at that. That's part of kind of very classical epidemiology, just trying to figure out who's the most at risk and where can we, sort of push our public health resources, all of our contact tracing, and all of our communication, other support that we need to give people. Who needs that the most? So that's kind of what I'm doing as well.
Thank you, Maria. Julie, what are you doing during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, so I work for an organization that's gives away money. And so what we do is we look for the things that are most important to support for the entire pandemic response. So we are supporting things like some vaccines and then some public health things like contact tracing efforts like Maria just mentioned. But then we're also supporting a lot of things that are really important because of all of everything that's happened because we're in a pandemic. So making sure that people have enough access to food and are able to be able to pay their bills and things that are very important that as much as is very important to address all the public health and the medical part, it's also really to address the rest of the person too. And so we kind of look to support every aspect.
Thank you, Julie. Florian, did your life change during the pandemic as a researcher?
A little bit. So my laboratory started to work on COVID, on this virus on January 10th. That was when the sequence of the virus was released. And since then, we have been working on understanding how our immune system responds to the virus, understanding of how many people in New York, for example, were infected and how deadly the virus in New York really was. So we have pretty good numbers. We actually got a paper with that accepted last week in Nature and another paper this week in Science. So we're doing a lot of work and we're spreading that information very quickly. We're also working a little bit on what can be done against coronavirus. We are working on vaccines. We're working on antivirals. We're working a little bit with large vaccine companies that already have late-stage clinical trials ongoing. But we also started to work with smaller companies in Thailand and Vietnam and Brazil to make vaccines against COVID-19 locally there in a relatively cost-effective way. So we have been working on this virus for a very long time. And if you remember in March, when everybody was told to stay home, we actually spent more and more time in the laboratory and at work. So it has been a pretty exhaustive year so far.
Thank you, Florian, all three of you, for the important work that you're actually doing during this pandemic. Okay, so let's take a couple more questions from the chat. Tessa, do you have some questions for us?
I definitely do. So this one's from Tenzin. Can the flu or coronavirus help save us from other viruses? And this is for you, Florian.
Not directly, but indirectly. So, you know, scientists are very good at learning things. And so if bad things happen, like the coronavirus pandemic right now, or, you know, bad flu seasons, we learn and we start to get better prepared. And what the coronavirus pandemic now does is, hopefully, it's going to help us to be much, much better prepared the next time. We might actually be better at understanding where these viruses come from. We might be much better prepared in terms of vaccines. You see now that it's almost a year. We still don't have a vaccine. It takes a very long time. Maybe next time we have a vaccine after a few months, and maybe nobody needs to stay at home, actually. Maybe the virus doesn't even spread because we react to it much more quickly. So these viruses don't help us directly to fight new viruses that might come in the future, but we get a lot of information that we can use to get better prepared.
Thank you, Florian. Okay, do we have another question, Tessa?
Yes, we do. And this is a very interesting question from Ife. Can the flu get the flu?
Yeah, that's a really cool question, actually. So the flu cannot get the flu. However, there are rare exceptions where viruses can get viruses. And that's, for example, the case for hepatitis B virus that can catch a hepatitis D virus, which is a virus that then just tags along with hepatitis B virus. We also know the same for adenovirus, which is a virus that causes common cold. That can acquire adeno-associated virus, and then that virus tags along. The bad news is it doesn't make the viruses weaker. It just means that all of a sudden you now get infected with two viruses. So yes, viruses can get viruses, but it's not necessarily a good sign for us.
Wow, this seems like there are viruses out there that actually have special friends. Interesting. Thank you so much. Okay, do we have another question, Tessa?
Yes, we do. This one's from Tenzin, and this is for Maria. Can we achieve immunity from all viruses?
This is such a good question, and it is making me think of like a superhero that's like immune to all viruses, just like karate chopping all viruses all the time. I will say the answer is no if we don't have any vaccines. So there's viruses like other seasonal coronaviruses, not the one that's causing COVID-19, but other sort of normal kind of run-of-the-mill coronaviruses that also cause the common cold, and like adenovirus that Florian mentioned. Some of those viruses, when we get them, our immune system has a reaction, and then it kind of just forgets about it, and then we can get it again. And so that kind of has a little bit to do with our immune system, but it also has a little bit to do with the virus itself. Especially if it doesn't cause severe illness, sometimes our immune systems might say, oh, wasn't that big a deal. I'm not going to remember that one for next time. Whatever. I'll see it when it comes around again. But if we have a vaccine against that virus, the point of the vaccine is that we're so well protected before we even see the virus that we never really get a full-blown infection. And so that's what we're hoping for with flu vaccines, and that's what we've gotten for a lot of other vaccines that protect us against viruses, like the measles vaccine. There's a chickenpox vaccine. There's all sorts of vaccines that really help us there. So the real question I think you might be asking is, are we going to have a vaccine for every virus? And I think probably the answer is no, but I could be wrong. I've been wrong many times before.
And if you'll dream with me, you can imagine, what if we had treatments that are directed directed at the body. So rather than having a vaccine that's specific to a particular virus, like a flu or a coronavirus, but if it's something that just strengthens our immune system, then it would be able to kind of fight off any kind of virus, including ones we haven't thought of. So if you really want to start dreaming, that's a good place to start.
Thank you so much for answering this really, really fascinating question. Tessa, do we have another one coming from the chat?
Yes, we do. This is from Tenzin. Can the flu spread into hot or cold places? And this is from Maria.
That's a great question. Yes, the flu can spread into hot and cold places. People living in hot and cold places do get the flu. But there's some evidence that suggests that their seasons are maybe a little bit different. So Julie mentioned earlier, people in the Southern Hemisphere have a different flu season than people in the Northern Hemisphere. In the US and Canada, we've got this peak that sort of maybe starts November, and then it kind of goes like up in December, January, February, and then maybe March it starts to decline a little bit. And that's kind of flipped. So it's almost during our summer months that is when the Southern Hemisphere folks have their flu season. As you get closer to the equator, it's maybe not as much of like a straight up and straight down thing. Maybe it's a little bit more like like it's hard to see because I've got this like background, but it's maybe like one of these things. The wave isn't quite as big. So it definitely can infect people living in those areas, but the shape of the epidemic might be a little bit different.
That's so interesting. Actually, there was one question sent in previously, like from Edelix, and she's go to Manhattanville Community Center. Like, how long is the flu season? What does it make end, or what makes it end? Can you speak a little bit about this? Because I think it fits nicely together.
That's also such a good question. And I think that maybe Florian and Julie may have some additions to what I'm about to say, but I'll tell you, your question is a question that epidemiologists are asking every year, and we're still stumped, even though we have known about the flu for decades and decades and decades. If you've seen one flu season, you've seen one flu season. So we just keep like trying to figure out what it is that's going to make the flu season last for as long as it does. Usually, this is not always the case, but usually it lasts around from November to maybe March or April. Usually, there's maybe a peak in like January, February, but it can differ based on the year, based on the strain that's circulating, based on the kind of vaccines everyone got or didn't get. The other really important thing to remember is that as we move on in the season, we change our behavior because we're getting sick and we're staying home. We're avoiding other people because we don't feel good. We feel junky, and we're preventing. But when we're avoiding other people when we feel junky, we're helping them not get sick, which is really good. We're changing our immunity by getting a flu shot, and that helps taper the pandemic down. And then there's also something that happens after enough people have gotten sick in a population. Maybe the virus just doesn't have any more people to infect. It's possible that happens for flu. It's kind of hard to tell, but it could be happening sometimes for flu, maybe within a house, maybe everyone gets the flu, unfortunately, and then the virus doesn't have any more people to infect.
Thank you, Maria. I now know so much more about this. Great. So I think we have another question from the chat. Tessa, is that correct?
Yes, we have one more question from the chat. Is there such thing as a permanent vaccine? And this one's for Julie.
Oh, good. So right now the vaccines are made the same, flu vaccines are made the same way every year. So that's the same process, but what's in it changes a little bit. And there's actually a big meeting in February in which a bunch of scientists, well, they usually get together in person. I don't know what they're going to do this year, but they get together and they look at all of the different flu strains that are circulating, and they make a prediction. They make their best guess about which strains will be around us in the coming fall and winter and spring. So they're they kind of need a crystal ball to kind of guess what the future will bring. And so we don't. And so the strains usually often change each year. So it's not a permanent vaccine. What a lot of scientists, researchers, and pharmaceutical companies are working on our vaccines, are what we call universal influenza vaccines that would be more permanent, so that they would be able, so rather than having to kind of tweak the recipe every year of the different and try to guess what strains would be circulating, these universal influenza vaccines would protect us against the strains that are coming in the future. So and hopefully we would only need maybe just one or two for our whole lives, or maybe just one every 5 or 10 years, which would be wonderful.
Fantastic. All right, so I think we have another question from the chat. Tessa.
Yes, we have another one from Tenzin. So can they put a lot of vaccines together to make a better vaccine? Awesome question.
That's a great question. Who wants to take that one?
Oh, I was going to jump in, but I think Julia also has something to say. So
Maria, you start.
Okay. So I was going to say, yes, they can do that. And it's true for some vaccines that you get actually more than one vaccine in that shot. So like the MMR vaccine, that stands for measles, mumps, rubella. So you're actually getting 3 vaccines in one, which is great because you don't have to get 3 shots. Bonus. And that's not the only one that's like that. But when we get flu, it's just one flu vaccine. We don't get vaccinated against like flu and then also chickenpox at the same time. But the other part that I think you might be asking about is how do we like construct a vaccine? Like how do we make sure that what's in the vaccine is helpful for us? And that's part of what's happening right now with COVID-19 vaccines. We're looking at what we've already done. We're looking at the vaccines that we've created in the past, and then we're also looking at new ways to make vaccines that we've never used before. And we're putting those pieces together to see, hey, what's the best way that we can get a good, safe, effective vaccine that works for everyone? And Julia, I want to make sure that you can add to that if you like.
Oh no, I loved your answer.
All right, thank you. I really like these questions. Keep them coming. It's fascinating. It's like, that's what researchers do. It's just like, observe the world and, think about it and have all these questions. So Tessa, I think we have one more question.
Yeah, we have one more from Tenzin. Can viruses merge together to become stronger? For example, can 2 flu cells merge together?
Yeah, unfortunately, the answer is yes. So what can happen is that you have 2 different flu viruses. Let's say one that infects humans usually, and another one that usually infects birds. And now somebody, maybe a farmer, who just got infected with flu that infects people, also gets infected with flu from, let's say, his chickens. And so he's infected with 2 different types of flu viruses. And if those 2 viruses infect one single cell in that farmer, they can start to exchange the information that's in there. I told you there's these 8 pieces of information, and so they might reassemble. And the viruses that come out of that cell might have information from one virus and some other and information from the other virus, right? And it's not like there's then more information, but there is a different content of information in that new virus. And that might actually make a virus stronger and maybe more deadly. And that's sometimes what happens when we have flu pandemics, right? So in 1957 or 1968, or also in 2009, the new viruses that caused this pandemic were actually mixtures of 2 different viruses. And so this is something we always look out for, and we are very concerned about.
Okay, I see. Thank you. All right, so thank you so much for joining today. This is actually all the time we have. It was really great being with all of you, and just a huge clap for all the great questions we actually got. So let me get my share screen ready. So thank you to everyone for joining us for this another student town hall, and to everyone who submitted questions and have been participating in the chat. We appreciate our guest scientists Maria, Julie, and Florian for all answering the questions. So a huge shout out to you. Now, BioBus brought everything online doing our safe social distancing so that we can still create a warm and welcoming space for people to learn about science, practice research, and make discoveries. We have a lot of ways for you to do science from home. And right now you can all find us online on our website, biobus.org. If you want to join a live laboratory class with your school and actually meet our scientists, you can just go and ask your teachers and parents to check out the Discover at Home classes. We also have a lot of cool experiments and challenges out that everybody can try at home now in our Explore at Home collection to investigate science around your house and share your research. And then we also invite you every week back at 4 o'clock to the student town halls to learn more about interesting topics, watch past student town halls, and find new facts to explain to your friends and family. We also have a lot more fun and interesting science for you ready to share with you. So mark your calendars now. Every Tuesday, we launch a new Explore at Home Science Challenge. Right now, it's about how does music affect your mood. If you love Tetris and video games and music and you want to do some nice research at home, check it out. And of course, every Thursday at 4 o'clock, we have student town halls. The next one is actually also going to be about vaccines and treatments. So please join us if you get curious about more treatments for viruses. And you will find them both here at the BioBus YouTube channel. You can find all the information about us on biobus.org. Of course, follow us on social media. We are on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you fancy. And use our handle BioBus to tag us and ask us questions and keep discovering at home with us. Now, this is a good welcome and goodbye, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.